Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of the hardest yet most rewarding parts of the Christian life, waiting on God. In a fast-paced world where we want answers now, waiting can feel frustrating. But here's the truth. Waiting on God is one of the best decisions you'll ever make. Let's explore why. So, what does it mean to wait on God? Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It's an active posture of trust and patience, believing that God is at work even when we can't see it. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength." Waiting on God gives us strength to face life's challenges. It teaches us to rely not on our timing, but on God's perfect plan. Our first story comes from a woman who spent years waiting for an answer to her prayers. Jennifer, I prayed for years to have children, but nothing seemed to happen. I started to doubt, but I kept praying and trusting God. After 7 long years, I finally became pregnant. Looking back, I realized that God was preparing me in that season of waiting. The joy of receiving my miracle was worth every moment of the wait. Waiting on God taught me patience, faith, and trust like nothing else could. Jennifer's story reminds me of the biblical account of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a child, but they waited over 25 years for Isaac to be born. Even though they doubted at times and tried to take matters into their own hands, God remained faithful to his promise. This story teaches us that waiting on God isn't just about the destination. It's about the lessons we learn along the way. Let's be honest, waiting is hard. It's in our nature to want quick results. But often, the struggle is where God does his greatest work in our hearts. When we wait, we're learning to surrender control, to trust God's timing over our own. It stretches our faith, teaches us patience, and refines our character. Our next story comes from Michael, who found himself in a long season of waiting for his career to take off. Let's hear his story. Michael, I had this dream job in mind, but every door I tried to open was closed. I applied to so many places, but nothing worked out. It was frustrating, but instead of giving up, I leaned into prayer and waited on God. I realized he was teaching me patience and preparing me for something better. Eventually, I was offered a job that was far better than what I had been praying for. God knew what I needed, and his timing was perfect. Michael's story reminds me of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned unjustly. He waited over 13 years before he saw the fulfillment of God's promise when he became second in command in Egypt. Joseph's story shows us that even in the waiting, God is working behind the scenes. Waiting doesn't mean God has forgotten us, it means he's preparing us for something greater. So, why is waiting on God the best decision you'll ever make? Here are a few key reasons. 1. Waiting builds character. When we wait, we grow in patience, humility, and trust. Waiting strengthens our faith. It forces us to rely on God, even when we can't see the outcome. Waiting leads to better outcomes. God's plan is always better than anything we could imagine. Waiting deepens our relationship with God. It gives us time to seek him, listen, and align our hearts with his will. Our final story comes from Mark, who waited for years for his broken relationship with his father to be restored. Here's his story. Mark, my dad and I hadn't spoken for years. I was angry and bitter, but I kept praying for reconciliation. For a long time, it felt like nothing was changing. But slowly, God softened both our hearts, and after 10 years of waiting, we finally sat down and talked. It was the most healing conversation I've ever had. If I had given up, I wouldn't have experienced the peace and restoration God brought. The wait was worth it. Maybe you're in a season of waiting right now and it feels endless. But let me encourage you. God's timing is perfect, and he is always at work, even when we can't see it. Trust that God is working in your waiting. He is shaping you, preparing you, and positioning you for something greater. Don't rush his process. He knows what's best for you. Here are some practical tips to help you wait on God well. 1. Stay in prayer. Keep communicating with God, even when the answers seem delayed. 2. Be patient and trust his timing. Remember that God sees the bigger picture. 3. Seek community. Surround yourself with people who can encourage and pray with you. 4. Remain faithful where you are. Use the time of waiting to serve and grow where God has placed you. As we've seen today, waiting on God is never wasted time. Whether you're waiting for healing, provision, or an answer to prayer, trust that God's timing is perfect and His plan is always good. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, waiting on God is one of the best decisions you'll ever make. Be encouraged, stay faithful, and trust in His perfect plan. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. Psalm 27:14. Share, like, and subscribe for more uplifting Bible verses and spiritual guidance.